According to NASA, this is the best time ever. Chance to focus on Venus, the world. This comes after the recent revelation of potential existence of life on the planet off. Opportunity that you inadvertently chose to take. A review of NASA's 1960s records. The space agency would be phoning Venus, a planet of punishment, concurrently. Mars changed into our predetermined aim for such meticulous designation of the most. Observing far-off planets was usual during the ferocious space race. The Soviet Union's primary goal was to send expensive expeditions to the terrifying planet Venus, revealed almost no chances for life, but the Russian space program failed to discontinue the Venera initiative till the Soviet Union's collapse due to Neil deGrasse Tyson. At last, we understand why. Come along as we dissect the new images from Venus taken by the collapse of the Soviet Union. Union was vibrant in a variety of ways, disregarding the fact that it changed the overall course of the global-wide. However, the absence of the domain also revealed a number of secrets with it. The reality that the Soviet Union had a big disregard for confidentiality from managing the most remarkable intelligence agency on the globe to becoming enigmatic regarding their communication with aliens signifies the former superpower has distinct secrets held within prior to the United. America ruled most of the planets. Space projects the Soviet Union was taking the lead in the match while the realm lengthy record of accomplishments and the most amount of unprofitable space missions. The awful interior was the main focus. Venus, the planet, in Russian. Venus would be perceived as Venera, and hence the mission's final name that covered the years 1961 to 1983 while the U.S. was preoccupied with deploying troops, lunar missions, so in a strange manner, the Soviet Union chose to employ their resources elsewhere. We are unable to state that the whole fixation on the second strange planet from our sun. Did the Soviets intend to use Earth's surface as an amazing and enjoyable military establishment, or might they conceivably intending to settle the world after looking up there for some form of life? It's really difficult to determine why the Soviet attention was on the terrible planet since these were given names. Investigation trips during the Cold. They weren't quite ready for war. All of their locations and targets. Truthfully, everything we are aware of the Venusian mission's foundation is unarchived and declassified evidence. Even so, it's difficult to identify what and whether the Soviets were searching for. They ever divulged the secrets of Venus is not where the Soviets landed. That's once, twice, or even 3 times. Simply put, the Soviet Union launched 28 expensive rockets to the magnificent planet, and 13 of them ventured into Venusian air. 8 of them managed to land. These tricky operations had put the Russians in a prominent role in space exploration. Without a doubt, the United States of America was near second, but NASA had superior. Enthralled with satellites and imaginative arrangements as opposed to studying life on planets after he started concentrating on Mars. Later, neither really outstanding nor particularly awful records. Textbook might not explain this to you, but the first space program was the Soviet one. Organization to look into the atmosphere of a planet different from our own. There were yet more firsts on it. Resume, the USSR emerged as the first condition to make a gentle landing on another planet, and it resulted in the return of images and audio captured from the surface of. Yes, the Soviets are on a different planet, had their own little stride toward humankind. One momentous leap for humanity. Before to the U.S., so why are we just sporadically learn about such accomplishments? Keep in mind what we spoke regarding the Soviet Union's penchant for secrecy. That's just one of several justifications for the command of Soviet space program from the renowned agency back in 1992 was discontinued following the CIA and the USSR needed to be revived with a new Russian identity rose. Cosmos's historical data was largely either gone or obliterated. This is precisely why we are unable to clearly answer 28 rockets were launched into the Venusian environment in any case, if necessary. Determine the most likely estimate possible. The Soviet Union's choice to study Venus was, more than anything, regarding cost-effectiveness. Otherwise, it wouldn't be the space program. Wasn't worried about whether or not the planet that they sought out sensible, water presence and solar force, radiation, and the overall characteristics of the Earth. In the absence of several of these space missions, it would not have been feasible to measure Venus's warm temperatures and dense atmosphere nowadays. According to some cosmologists, attempt not to believe that the planet may sustain life. There, the temperatures are high enough to melt lead, and there is also a lack of water. Because of the dense atmosphere, the climate, Venus is under several times the pressure of Earth, although these are really recent advances, and to disregard the USSR's contribution to Venus research is comparable to changing history in such a way that the Soviets were worried about Venus's worthwhile investigating, even if only to the space race you were studying to a flurry. Mars and other more sensible planets weren't precisely off-limits, but there was further, more expensive than sending Venus probes. It all boils down to the separation between Earth and a celestial body. The horrible planet is generally, our home is barely 40 million kilometers away, whereas Mars is typically 250 million km away. Such enormous disparities in severe inequalities in distance. Financial burden. If the U.S. wasn't the largest economy in the world, it would never have made studying Mars's different. Rumors indicate that Soviet missions were troublesome and possessed substantial technical flaws in the spaceship, naturally, weren't designed to go endless distances. Moreover, the company had a dismal past, becoming disconnected from its rockets, so it explains the Soviet space programs was deciding on a quicker and more direct, a voyage that would produce outcomes. But if the space race is not taken into account in this perspective, the Van Era narrative, missions would not be complete, and the U.S. was absent from the space map at the time the Soviet initiative introduced the first. The synthetic spacecraft Sputnik 1 in 1957 saw this action amplify the area battle and strengthen Soviet hegemony. In any case, what's truly fascinating is the rationale behind U.S. attention to the moon. Besides unidentified variables, NASA had a number of its Venus missions failures. The 1960s, hence the U.S. Space Organization, came to a standstill, referred to as the Venus curse each time they initiated a probe to explore the Venusian environment. Things didn't go well. This is the exact moment the Soviet Union witnessed a chance to take advantage of NASA's shortcomings. Both the U.S. and the USSR at the time were adamant on winning the space race. The most reliable tactic was to utilize two distinct opportunities. It was a triumph, especially for the Soviet satellite program, captured Earth's twin planet as its primary accomplishment in the space race, doing a task that is significant. Competitor had neglected to take action despite the scarce resources of the Soviet Union and government in decline. It consistently sent missions to Venus in order to safeguard its gaining ground on the U.S. rather than concentrating on NASA's core. Pay attention to the moon. It's really important. There was opposition to division and misleading exposure to conceal their primary problems involving Venus. The American group was inspired to disparage USSR's attention to the planet in the media, called Venus the evil planet. These titles, however, became man's fate when Mars didn't concern the Soviet Union. The goal was to demonstrate supremacy over neither the Americans nor they were unable to accomplish so. The Van Era. Nowadays, missions are all but forgotten past, but even with their antiquated initially, those missions were remarkably sophisticated, advanced, and really ambitious. If we had to choose an occasion that signaled the start of the Van Era missions in the space age, would require the lead dating from the 1950s. Soviets started to play around with the the layout and technical specifications of the probes, and over the ensuing 3 decades they keep developing and launching interplanetary probes as a component of the Venera program, as the initiative was pursuing a very turbulent Cold War. The Soviet Union was concentrated on making the most use of their resources. Fortunately for them, the first few years of the conflict gave them access to more real technological labor capacity compared to the U.S. Advantage proved to be quite beneficial. As they grow in competence, the USSR started to gather and launch more rockets built to endure high, lengthy distances and high heights. The Soviets hurried to test both manned and any unmanned spacecraft. In contrast to the Soviet scholarly community collaborated on several calculations and further calculations to do exact directions for Venus missions that are running in the background on Mars. Additionally, programs were operating efficiently. Nothing was planned for the Soviet Space Agency greater significance than creating intricate equipment used in these probes resulted in the greatest innovation in the space exploration history. The Soviet agency introduced Venera 3 in 1966, being the first man-made probe to penetrate Venus's atmosphere and effectively communicate with the globe. Bring attention to this significant achievement intensified the rivalry between the two superpowers that do not include America. Missions that were rife with mistakes and stymies the Soviet initiative proceeded to advance in spite of the program's constant progress in the USSR, able to effectively send probes into the atmosphere of Venus. The most a major problem with this strategy was restricted ability to create. For the Soviets swiftly resolved their design problems and fired the most advanced rockets of the 1970s Venera program. Their capacity to carry allowed them to releasing the initial 2 launches of V4 and Venera 5, as most historians would say. This decade was the most fascinating one in the space exploration history, without a question the U.S. tried to answer similar launch schedules. Therefore, why didn't the Soviet organization select 2 launches to Venus? In order to comprehend this, you must acknowledge that space travel needs sophisticated equipment to collect the highest possible degree of data and proof. Naturally, the first spaceship launched to investigate the surface of the planet. This is precisely the events involving Venera 4. Since the all went okay during launch and the spacecraft reached Venus's atmosphere, the Venera, a Soviet program, advanced 5. It went beyond simply restating the second spacecraft was launched first, especially made to get fresh data regarding the globe. In this manner, the Soviets designed to overcome obstacles of temperature, air pressure, and radiation on Venus. Therefore, they were spared wait for their response for too long. As the 1970s progressed, the Soviet program was approaching the most developed stage of all of the USSR's Venera missions. Completed up to then concerned research and growth. It was necessary to make sure that their innovations and creations were optimized. It also involved perfection, the methods and mechanisms of intergalactic travel. But for the Decade 2 of Venera missions, Soviet Union had planned to carry out exploration flights. The greatest and most the intriguing debut of this era was the 11th Soviet probe was Venera 7. Entered Venus's atmosphere. It turned into the first spacecraft to transmit data from an other world, the high planet. Temperatures, surface density, and strains were already observed at this point that the Soviets attempted to document. The next main sound is Venusian. The program's achievement was Venera 13 had outperformed by the mid-1980s every prior interplanetary analysis. The intricacy of this spaceship was the pioneer in full color capture. Panoramic photos of the surface of Venus concurrently with the start of the Soviet program, Venera 14, to collect comparable data regarding the surface of the Earth, as the Soviet Union was possibly the first nation to discover and identify Venus as the Russian spacecraft agency has reaffirmed its goals for Venus missions. VAD is an aircraft joint venture. Roscosmos and NASA's mission to examine the surface and atmosphere of Venus, as represented by the acronym Venerate. Venerate in Russian, as is customary, signify lasting and is scheduled for release. The target is for the late 2020s or early 2030s to examine the atmosphere of the planet, geological past, and look for indications of habitability in the past or the present. Among the spacecraft will be an orbiter, possibly an inflatable, and a lander to examine the planet's atmosphere thoroughly. The Venera mission's legacy surpasses their technological achievements and worldwide implications. These missions were initiated by the Soviet Union at the pinnacle of the Cold War. Was the height of human inventiveness and tenacity in investigating the cosmos while dealing with many obstacles and problems. The Soviets persisted in their efforts to discover the planet Venus's mysteries, long regarded as antagonistic and hostile to life. Among the most important details on the Venera missions was their innovative application of robotic probes to examine the atmospheres of planets and floors. These missions laid the way for route for next research beyond Earth's vicinity and placed the basis for our comprehension of planetarium science. The information gathered by the Venera spacecraft delivered important insights into the harsh environment of Venus, encompassing its intense heat, poisonous air pressure, and crushing carbon dioxide dominates the atmosphere. Additionally, the developments in technology accomplished by the Venera program had wider consequences for space investigation as a whole. The growth of strong materials resistant to heat, communication networks, and trustworthy techniques for landing were crucial accomplishments that supported later space missions. Mars, for example, and beyond. The teachings, insights from the Venera missions keep influencing spacecraft design and operational strategies in modern endeavors to explore space beyond there. Both technological and scientific importance of the Venera missions, in addition, had significant political and social impacts during the space race period. These missions served as a symbol of the rivalry between superpowers for supremacy in space research. For the Soviet Union's victory in the modern era, missions was not limited to scientific discovery, but it's also about proving technical mastery and intellectual dominance over the United States. Worldwide community carefully examined each Venera mission, acknowledging its significance in deepening the knowledge of humanity about the solar system. The prosperous soft Venera 7's 1970 landing on Venus represented a significant accomplishment as the first satellite to transmit data from another planetary surface. This achievement demonstrated how the Soviet Union could conquer the immense obstacles that by Venus's severe circumstances. In addition to scientific apparatuses, the Venera spacecraft were equipped with cameras that recorded the initial up-close pictures of Venus. These pictures showed a stony surface, terrain dominated by aircraft, and scientists can benefit from volcanic features with insightful knowledge of the planets, the formation and history of the panoramic images captured by subsequent missions, like Venera 13 and 14, improved upon our knowledge of Venus's surface, structure, and morphology. In spite of triumphs, the Venera missions encountered as well their own share of setbacks and challenges. Some expeditions were either unsuccessful in reaching Venus or gained technical experience faults that kept them from sending information back to Earth. The working in Venus's harsh environment surroundings, including harsh temperatures higher than 450 degrees Celsius or 842 degrees Fahrenheit, and caustic clouds containing sulfuric acid, pose serious spacecraft engineering challenges. Design and functionality. Despite the tenacity and commitment of Soviet engineers and scientists working on the Venera program, opened doors for later trips to Venus and other stars. Embodies the Venera mission's legacy. endures in the continuing investigation of Venus by international space agencies, incorporating the future VD mission from NASA in working along with Roscosmos looking. The VD mission seeks to advance and expand upon the accomplishments of its forerunners by deploying cutting-edge research instruments, Venus's surface topography and atmosphere, possible indicators of the past or present, habitability. The goal serves as a cooperative endeavor to decipher the lingering enigmas surrounding Earth's closest neighboring planet and to increase our comprehension of the circumstances that possibly sustain life outside of our planet.